This podcast is produced by the Center for Deployment Psychology at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. In addition, references to any specific companies, products, processes, or services does not necessarily constitute or imply endorsement by the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Welcome to CDP's podcast, Practical for Your Practice,
where we give you actionable intel to support what you do, one colleague to another.
Well, welcome back. I'm going to say welcome back, everyone, because I am hoping that this is not your first time listening. But if it is your first time listening, welcome. I am Jenna Ermold, one of the hosts of Practical for Your Practice podcast with the ever amazing, I have to use different adjectives every time, Carin Lefkowitz.
Please keep me on my toes.
Yes, I will definitely keep you on your toes. Who did indeed remember to hit record, which is like how we like to start every podcast. So she already did a great job. She already did half the work is done.
I feel like I've done my part already, and I could, you know what, I would
You just get
typically
off.
say I could end, but I'm actually pretty excited about the discussion today, so I'm going to stay.
Okay. Well, I think that's a smart decision because I have had the chance to chat with our guest today before the podcast and am incredibly excited to continue our conversation. We are very excited to welcome Adrienne Griffen, who is our guest today. Welcome to Practical for Your Practice, Adrienne.
Well, thank you, Jenna and Carin. It's great to be here.
And if you can, we would love the topic for today is, well, it's maternal mental health, but more specifically, military mothers' mental health. And we are thrilled to have Adrienne here. And if you can just give our listeners a little snapshot of who you are and what you do, that would be great.
Absolutely. So again, thank you so much for inviting me to be on the podcast today. So I call myself an accidental advocate because if you had told me, when I was young and in the military that I was going to be working in the field of women's mental health, I really it wasn't even in my consciousness, right? So, I graduated from the Naval Academy. I was an intelligence officer. So I had very high level security clearances. I worked at the White House. I worked for the United Nations. I thought I was going to run the world.
Right.
I was going to be the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State or something like that. And then I had a baby and I had postpartum depression and it just fundamentally rocked my world. And so here I am, many years later. My son is now 25. I have three children. He's the middle of my three children. They're all in their early 20s. And here I am, doing national policy around maternal mental health. So you just never know how your life is going to unfold.
I can't think of a more important thing to do. So I'm actually thrilled that that's where you landed. Sorry, Carin, were you going to say something?
Okay. I have a lot to say about that. First off, that feels like the theme of all of the discussions we have, Adrienne, by the way. In fact, we had an episode where Jenna, myself, and Kevin, our co-host, talked about how we got to where we are, and it has never been a linear path ever. So that's not surprising. Two, I might argue that you are running the world by dealing with women's mental health. I don't know. But also it's not too late. You can still be Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense if you wanna roll. Why should it be too late to do that?
Yeah, step aside, Pete Hegseth. Yeah.
Yep. Well, we've got our backing.
Yeah. Thank you.
I feel like you might prioritize things we care about. So
yeah, and I joke around with my husband about this, and he said, practically speaking, you've actually helped a lot of people. And maybe more than if you had been the Secretary of War. So I'm like, okay, yeah. So that makes me feel good. But, I joke around and I'm like, nobody grows up saying, I want to be a mental health advocate, right? You want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a fireman, or whatever, an astronaut. But here we are. Yeah.
Here we are. Hey, I wanted to be a tap dancer and a ballet dancer. And here we are,
So little known secret, I'm a tap dancer. Although I haven't tap danced in forever, but my mother ran a little dance studio in the little town that we grew up in. And yes, I love tap dancing. So how about you?
Yes, I may go to a tap class on Thursday evenings, as a matter of fact.
There you go. That's awesome.
All right, we're going to have a separate episode about tap dancing. I'm here for it.
I
Got
was
it.
gonna say, as you said that, I was like, oh, Corinne's gonna die.
Here we go.
This is
Here
already
we go.
amazing.
This is about women's mental health, and dancing
Right,
is part of
is
that.
part of it. Yes, yes. And want to talk about like stress reduction, like when
Yeah.
you're tap dancing, you can't think of anything else except for your feet. Yeah,
Right. What are my feet doing?
right,
Yes.
right.
And how
So let's
stupid do I
just save
look?
that. We'll maybe save that for actionable intel, right? Sign
Okay.
Okay.
up for a
Actionable
tap
intel,
class.
everybody take tap classes.
Yeah.
In this
It,
episode, how tap dancing can change your life in ways you never dreamed of.
There you go.
I think
Yeah.
that's the title. That's the working title.
There we go.
In all seriousness, I'm so delighted to have this conversation. I think that there has been more talk lately about maternal mental health, postpartum mental health, et cetera. We're still, I think, way behind the eight ball. But then, especially when you add military women into that equation, to me, it seems like that conversation is so limited. So I'm delighted
Yeah.
to have you here and to expand our conversation on that. So maybe that's how we can start, besides the tap
Yeah.
dancing. Maybe
Yeah.
we can start by,
We can tap dance around it. No.
yeah, oh, I love it. When we
Yeah.
say maternal mental health, what do you mean by that? And what do you think behavioral providers need to know about
Oh
that?
my gosh. Okay. Well, those are big questions. Well, let's get started. So, when we say maternal mental health, we're talking about the mental health of women during and following pregnancy. So, basically a 2-year time frame from conception all the way through baby's first birthday. And we used to call it postpartum depression, meaning postpartum after the baby was born, and depression. Everybody on this podcast knows what depression is. But we know that these mental health conditions actually often start during pregnancy and often include anxiety, irritability, rage, intrusive thoughts, obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD, so the whole gamut. And so we're trying to really broaden that definition. Many people, especially, civilians who are not mental health providers, right, really understand postpartum depression. So I often will say, maternal mental health conditions like postpartum depression. But we're really trying to, be much more expansive in terms of the timing, 2 years, and the different mental health conditions. And you're right, there's been a lot more talk about maternal mental health and mental health in general, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And, in the military has come a long way. Now, I served, I got out of the service in 1993. And, way back then, there was no discussion of mental health. And I
Right.
know the military has gone a long way in addressing things like PTSD and traumatic brain injury, but certainly sort of women's mental health related to pregnancy and childbearing. I'm guessing that's not really a high priority for our military. And I remember, there's stigma about being a woman in the military because there's still so relatively few. There's stigma around being pregnant. There's stigma around having a mental health condition. Put them all together, and there's like nobody wants to touch it.
Yeah.
And that's actually a really good segue to sort of the next piece that and similarly, so I was active duty and I became pregnant with twins.
Yeah,
And that was a really challenging journey. And I had
yeah,
fantastic care. Like that part was not what I'm speaking of, but just the toll of having twins plus being an active duty officer and expectations and things like that. And, being put on partial bed rest was not very popular, right?
Hmm.
Because in understanding you're losing an asset, you're losing, manpower. But, as a, Naval Academy graduate and service member, this idea, we talk a lot here at CDP about military culture and kind of that warrior ethos or military ethos and identity. And this identity tends to value things like stoicism and self-reliance and, excellence and all those things. How does this clash, or does it clash with, the vulnerabilities of the postpartum period, or obviously expanded to 2 years, so not just the postpartum, but
yeah.
how does that even fit together?
It doesn't, as you just accurately portrayed, right? So we have both military culture, which you just laid out, really emphasizes, right, that warrior ethos, service before self, unit before self, just all of that, right? And then we also have military lifestyle, which,
Hmm.
as we all know, multiple moves, not being near your family of origin, just the upheaval, the concern about your spouse or loved ones being deployed. So you have these two things overlapping, the military culture and the military lifestyle, neither of which is very supportive of mental health conditions. And Jenna, as you pointed out, right, you think about somebody who may be pregnant and may not be able to perform their duties as assigned, right? And the impact on the unit, on morale, somebody can't be deployed, so somebody has to go in their place. And it just ripples through. So I understand why this is not a popular issue or not something that the military in general would feel kindly about. However, women are a valued part of our military, and how the mother does directly impacts how the entire family does. And whether, let's say, for example, that it's not the service member who's experiencing a mental health condition, but the spouse of, and that spouse is impacted. Like I remember I live in Arlington, Virginia, and for many, many years, I provided direct support to moms and families experiencing mental health conditions. And I remember getting this call from a new family. The mom had like a toddler and a newborn. The husband was lieutenant commander at the Pentagon, and she knew nobody. And the wheels were coming off the bus. This woman needed help. So I remember going there to her house to just stay with the two kids so she could have a nap. Right. And so, her husband, who's got a very important job working at the Pentagon, it's not like he can say, hey, I got to come home and take care of my wife. So, but he's being impacted, right? Because he's got to come home, take care of her. So it's and it's the only industry or the only environment where the mental health of the spouse can have an impact on the service member's career, right?
Yeah.
We're also very concerned about sort of the impact of mental health on somebody's career, on their security clearances, on their ability to get the job done. So there's a lot of extra stuff that goes with mental health in the military, and particularly maternal mental health in the military.
Well, and I think just to reflect on that, I mean, that was so eloquently put. We talk, we think in terms of disorders, right? We think in terms of depression and anxiety and XYZ, but sometimes it's also sort of this shift in identity. And so when your identity is that of, I'm going to be inclusive of spouses as well. Like this is not just the active duty, maternal mental health show. This is about anybody military connected who is having challenges. But when that identity shifts, like there's some great support and work we can do in that realm too, that doesn't have to be like pathologizing what's going on, but your whole identity shifts, your whole and expands, and parts of that are going to work with your military identity. Some of it might not work with your military identity, and it's such a complex issue. So I think it's just one thing, why I really wanted to have this episode is just getting clinicians to be thinking about, like, how can I ask some really helpful questions around how somebody is doing and adjusting without it just being like, do you have baby blues? Like it's so much broader than that. And, it's a really important area to make sure you're thoroughly assessing what is the function of what's going on with that person.
Right. Well, I would say that becoming a parent is probably the biggest single identity transition that any of us could go through, and particularly becoming a mother, right? As you're growing a baby.
Or two.
Yeah, or two, as the case may be. Yeah.
I got a 2-for-1. I was really lucky.
Yeah. But Jenna, you used a word earlier that really summarizes it, is the vulnerability. How vulnerable you feel as a pregnant person, as somebody who's experiencing a mental health condition, right? And it is the antithesis of what you signed up for being in the military. And so even acknowledging it is like really just opening yourself up to be judged, to be pushed to the side, right? Oh, this person isn't what we thought they were. They're the weak link in the chain. And that is just the worst thing to be considered in the military, is that weak link.
I was wondering about that piece, well, a related piece. Another unique aspect of military is that you often get your medical care as part of your role, as part of your job. So thinking about, Jenna, how to ask these questions, how to assess for postpartum issues, how to assess for mental health issues, it seems to me that there would be this extra burden, this extra vulnerability, because you're being assessed by a medical system that is also your employer and determines whether you can work or not, whether you're fit for duty. Am
Right.
I?
And in some cases, you're being assessed by a senior officer.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
There's just like so many layers on top there. Yeah.
Oof. Okay. So
Yeah.
we've covered a lot of the vulnerabilities and a lot of the challenges and a lot of the difficulties. I feel very honored to be with two women who have lived this, who have lived motherhood while military. And so I'm hoping that you can shed light on some things that did go well in your experience, as well as Adrienne, hopefully what further advancements and progress are we making even after the two of you have
Yeah.
served?
Yeah. So let me offer one point of clarification. I actually had gotten out of the service before I
Oh.
had children, but I still was serving in sort of the intelligence field. So I still had these
Mm-hmm.
clearances.
Clearances.
And it was partly what took me so long to get help was really wrestling with this back then, 25 years ago. If you acknowledge that you had mental health conditions and or took antidepressant medication, you were at risk of losing your security clearance.
Mm-hmm.
So in effect, I was saying goodbye to this whole chapter of my existence, right? Wrapping that up and being like, well, I guess I'm no longer going to be working in that field. And so it was one of the many things that caused me to take a long time to get help. Um, the other part is how hard it is to get help when you're already experiencing a mental health condition. I never had experienced anything like this before. I never had anxiety or depression. I knew nothing about the behavioral health system. So it was trying to navigate this whole new complex world when I was already in the pit of anxiety and depression, had a toddler and a newborn. And I was just drowning. Even today, when I talk about it, I feel like I couldn't
Yeah.
get my head above water, right? And trying to take
Mm-hmm.
care of these two little people, figure out how I was going to get help, right? I'd get them both down for a nap for like 15 minutes, make a call. We're not accepting new patients. One of them would wake up, try again tomorrow. And it was like I was banging my head against a brick wall trying to get help.
Yeah.
And I had all of the resources available to me that I needed. I had a husband, I speak English, I had insurance, I had the internet, I have a supportive family, I have a master's
Right.
degree from Harvard, for God's sake. But
Yeah,
it
you're
took me,
resourced.
yeah. And it took me 6 months to get the help that I needed. So, that's partly what spurred me to do something about this because I was like, if it took me this long,
I
Absolutely.
really appreciate that point that,
yeah,
you are on paper in the prime position, or you were in the prime position to access help and to know when you needed help. You had the knowledge and the resources, and yet it was still really challenging and really difficult. So I appreciate that
yeah,
point.
yeah,
Well, and I think too, our systems are not set up like, so as you were saying that, all I'm thinking is like, and you have your well baby visits, and you have your postpartum visits, and you have your, and your baby is waking up every 3 hours. And I will out Carin is one of our amazing sleep experts. So she
Mhm.
probably has lots of thoughts on that. But I remember when I'm jumping around a little bit, but I actually, when I was in the military and we talked about this, Adrienne, I set up shop. I created a behavioral health consultation service in OBGYN so that I could be in there to help. They didn't have to go over to mental health. They could be seen in the clinic, and I worked with their OB postpartum to kind of figure out what we needed to do. And even that was hard, right? Even sometimes it was hard for women to make it in there, but when they finally did, I think even just sort of normalizing you have no restorative sleep. We have literally taken away all restorative sleep for you and expect you to be okay. So, nobody is going to be okay. I don't care how, wonderfully well you're doing or breastfeeding's going smoothly, which, it really doesn't for most women. I think that's another myth that it's just this natural, easy thing. And again, like those aren't even mental health things, right? Like I can't get restorative sleep and I have this really high demand if I am breastfeeding that is challenging and not going well. Anybody would feel stressed, irritable, off mood wise. But yet we like kind of expect that women are just going to be fine.
yeah. And
And
show back up for work in 6 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever it
I had
is.
8 weeks
Right.
with twins. I was supposed to be back at 6, and my OB extended it to 8 weeks postpartum. And people might not know that. So in the military, you get 6 weeks as standard. postpartum. And then if you have any complications or things, it can be extended to 8 weeks. I was not
Yeah.
ready to go back 8 weeks postpartum with twins.
8 weeks you can't even see straight. Like you said,
No.
you haven't slept through the night now for
Yeah.
months, right?
Yep.
And yeah, that restorative sleep. So I am so curious, Carin, are you a sleep expert for the parents or for the baby?
For the adults,
Okay.
for the adults. So when I'm thinking
Okay.
about maternal or parental, really
Yeah.
sleep, I hear that sleep starts to improve about 24 years after you have your baby. You start to get more restorative sleep again.
No, because
But
then you hit menopause and it goes out the window again.
Yeah.
for like a solid year, you get really good restorative sleep again. And then,
Yeah.
no, but
Yeah.
in all seriousness, yeah, when you're waking up multiple times a night, as soon as you've fallen asleep, you're back up again. Yeah, your cognitive
It's
function, your emotional function, your physical function, it's gone.
we use sleep deprivation as a form of torture, don't we? For
Yes.
Right.
prisoners of
Yeah.
war. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll tell you, we did have a third child after my experience with postpartum depression. And we put many things in place, one of which was protected sleep. So, like, I had a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn. So the 4-year-old and 2-year-old would go to bed at 8 o'clock. And literally, I would go down to the basement, earplugs in, white noise machine, and my husband would stay up with the newborn. And it was World Series time, so he always loves to watch baseball. So he would give her a bottle of milk, a bottle of formula, a bottle of beer. I don't know. I don't care.
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes, because I now had
What's in the bottle?
three little people that I needed to care for. And I needed,
Yep.
for that 4 to 5 hours of restorative sleep. And then we would switch. Then I would take the baby and he would sleep. And, I tell this story all the time, especially when I'm talking to new parents. And I'm like, our culture leads us to believe this immediate postpartum period is so beautiful. You look at the pictures on everybody's looks well rested, the baby's sleeping, the parents are glowing. I'm like, no, 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 it's a
Right.
shit show, right? It's all about survival. And it's like you and your spouse are like passing in the night as you pan the baby off, right? It is like all hands on deck trying to just survive. Yeah.
And that was really the most truly the biggest impact clinically was when we could get a mom restorative sleep. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
so we'd bring the spouse in, we would figure it
Yep.
out, we'd plan it
Yep.
out, and like
Yep.
the next week she'd come back and be like, I feel so much better.
So much
Like
better.
it's crazy. But anyway, we're
No, I used to run support groups for new moms, and exactly, we would have them every 2 weeks, and a mom would come back and we're like, holy cow, you're like a different person. She's like, I started, sleeping, right? Or the baby started sleeping or whatever. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. But,
My husband started feeding the baby beer. Everything seemed to change after that.
Everything worked better.
I remember my first attempt to try to get help through my behavioral health organization at our HMO. And like without any preamble, the psychiatrist was like, I'm going to give you sleeping pills. I'm like, for me or for the baby? Because
Right.
like, I'm only waking up because he's waking up. Right.
Yeah.
There was no conversation about why I might need them, what would the impact would be on the baby.
Right.
It was just,
Right.
yeah.
The dangers of, sleeping through as well.
Yeah.
Ladies,
Okay,
I
so
have a vague recollection of asking what is going well, what has gone well in maternal mental health, and so far, I think I heard maybe improving sleep sometimes helps. Is there
Okay, so
nothing going well?
yes, there are some things that are going well. So number one of the things that I have advocated for and my organization has advocated for is funding for the National Maternal Mental Health Hotline. Because I remember being up in the middle of the night with this infant and like he was born in December. It was dark. It was cold. I thought, I don't think I'm going to make it through to the morning. I need somebody to talk to right now. And there wasn't anybody. So the Maternal Mental Health Hotline, the number is 1-833-TLC-MAMA.
and we will put that in the show notes so for folks who
24,
can look it up there.
yeah, 24/7 voice and text support in English and Spanish. We've advocated for additional funding for specific outreach to the military community.
That's
And
amazing.
training for the hotline providers so that they understand some of these additional nuances of working with military families. Like saying, oh, go get some protected sleep. Well, I don't have a spouse because he's deployed, or, I don't live near my family, right? So understanding some of these things. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is we've advocated for federal funding to provide grants to states to create programs within their states. And we actually passed a piece of legislation as part of last year's National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, that calls for creating a maternal mental health program within the military. And I'm not so naive to think that that is actually, being implemented. I know that there's been a lot of other things that are a higher priority, but the fact that we have passed a piece of legislation that calls for this, recognizes the importance of women's mental health and maternal mental health, and that hopefully we will see some things roll out from that. So yeah, so
And
there are some good
that's
things.
the Moms Act, right?
That's called the Moms Act, yes.
And that's
Yeah.
maintaining our obligation to moms who serve, correct? Act.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
I'm
And
not
so,
sure you actually mentioned your organization. Do you want to mention that real
oh,
quick?
sure. So I lead a small nonprofit called the Maternal Mental Health Leadership Alliance. And one of the things that we do is advocate with Congress and with our federal agencies for these types of programs and for funding. So, we elevate this to the national level and make sure that our federal government is paying attention to this.
That's fantastic.
That's incredible. So those are quite a few things that are in the works right now or that are newly developed that could really change the landscape of the kind of
Yeah.
support that mothers get.
We also have launched this thing called the Roundtable on Military Mothers' Mental Health. So we bring together experts from the military, from the TRICARE organizations, nurses who may be, like there's this group of nurses who are working through the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society to do home visits, experts in mental health. And so like I just had a call right before this with one of the behavioral health the primary point of contact for behavioral health within the TRICARE system, and talking about how they're leading TriWest, how they're trying to educate their both the military folks working at MTFs, but as well as the civilians in the network about these issues. And so, we've got the buy-in from the top down.
Yeah.
It's just a long haul. Yeah. So we were brainstorming on all different things that we could do at different bases, and yeah, so there's lots of optimism.
Well, the listeners of this podcast span both civilian providers and military providers. So you have their ears right now in terms of being able to make some recommendations or some suggestions for how they could be most helpful. So what could you share? Yeah, you've got the stage. What can you share that our listeners could be doing right now?
Incoming actionable info.
Yeah, so the first thing I would really encourage is primarily for obstetric providers, right? To acknowledge and recognize that mental health conditions are the most common complication of pregnancy and childbirth. To talk about it with pregnant and postpartum patients, both obstetrics, pediatricians, family providers, anybody who's really interacting with new parents, right? Recognize that this is a very, very challenging time in life, and let them know that there are resources available. There's the National Maternal Mental Health Hotline, as I mentioned. There's also an organization called Postpartum Support International, and their website is postpartum.net. And that's where I started as a volunteer many, many, many years ago. And they have volunteers from all of the different military services. So these are either active duty military mothers themselves or spouses of, who then can help those military families. And they have a free online support group for military families, and they can help them navigate, here's how you can get help in your community. And so I would say definitely to the providers to start talking about this more with your pregnant and postpartum patients, and let them know about these important resources, the National Maternal Mental Health Hotline and Postpartum Support International.
Love that. I think I inadvertently took us into the segment that we generally on this podcast called actionable intel, which is, exactly what you're describing. What can our listeners do right now to be more proficient, to take action on your recommendations? And I didn't label it as such, but that's essentially what you gave us. So we're going to put all those links and resources in our notes and make them accessible, because we want our listeners to make use of all of those resources.
Right. And I realized I was focusing on the obstetric providers, and I know most of the listeners on this podcast are the mental health providers. But I would just actually encourage anybody who's interacting with, young families in the military, just to, acknowledge that it is very, very challenging, right? They're away from their family of origin. Yes, they have a close network of other military families, but they don't necessarily have sort of the community support that they might need. And so just to acknowledge that and say, hey, is there anything I can do to help? Right? How are you doing as a new parent? Often the focus is just on the baby or on the children, especially if twins. Jenna, I'm guessing everybody's like, oh, how are they doing? Never mind, how the heck are you doing? Right? Yeah.
Exactly. I'm not drooling today. That's good. Okay. If I may, I think coming off of what you're saying is just make sure you're talking about it. Give permission
Yeah,
to talk about it in a non-judgmental way.
right.
And normalizing, gosh, I work with a lot of young families in the military, and I know it's really challenging for a lot of folks. Like, how can it not be? People aren't sleeping, and there's,
Right.
all sorts of changes in identity. So what's going well for you? What's been really tough?
Yeah,
And just
exactly.
set it up where it's like you're not this, weak link. You're a
Right.
human
Yeah.
who has to be going through this adversity with some hiccups, right? There's got to be some stuff going on for you. And I think
Right.
that's such a powerful thing. Like ask the questions, ask and don't just be looking for postpartum depression, really try to get a sense of what is going on for that person and that family.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm glad you said family because, the other parent in the household or other adults in the
mhm,
household are also impacted, right?
mhm.
Nobody's getting to sleep. The whole routine is off. The house is a disaster, right? There's stress, there's financial stress. Like it can be a very challenging transition. And just to recognize that, like you said, Jenna, and hey, what's going well and what might you be struggling with and how can we help figure this out? And just again, acknowledging that the other parent can also be impacted.
100%.
I I appreciate that notion of it sounds so simple, but of simply having the conversation because as we've kind of alluded to, there's so much built into the system that would likely motivate people to just be okay, to just not talk about it, to be okay, be fit for duty,
Mhm.
get through the day in this system in particular, this
Yeah.
military system. So just being able to have that conversation seems like a simple but huge step.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's for the people who are, right, seeing providers getting into therapy, right?
Yeah.
What about for the most of the people who don't? So, for example, we know these are just general statistics, that 1 in 5 women experience a maternal mental health condition. And most of them, 75%, never get the care that they need. So they never get to see a therapist. They don't get a support group. They don't get medication. They get nothing. And they just kind of, somehow swim along until, I don't know, yeah, yeah,
And again, that's like one of the main things I would love to see be different and that we put, some investment in is not just integrating behavioral health into OBGYN, but it was also really cool. Like I got to be a behavioral health consultant in peds because then you're sometimes able to also catch the
some of them.
parent, right? So
Mhm.
yes, they're there for the well baby visit, but the pediatrician says, "Hey, I'd really like you to talk to Mr. and Mrs. Jones. It
Yeah.
seems like we've got some struggles going on." And so then again, we normalize, hey,
Yeah.
boy, this is hard.
Yeah.
How
Hmm.
can we support you better?
Yeah.
For the sake of time, I mean, Corinne and I could talk to you all day, and I wish we could. But for the sake of time, one of the things that we chatted about briefly before was that our theme this season are the 7 sins of EBPs, evidence-based practice. And we want to make sure that we get that in for this as well. So if you are thinking about that, in your experience as a subject matter expert and advocate in this area, what is kind of the cardinal sin or sins clinicians or systems commit when trying to provide evidence-based care to military connected moms?
So I think one of the deadly sins is that, and I might have said this earlier, that we really just focus on postpartum depression, right? When it's
Mhm.
really many more symptoms and for a longer period of time. And so, again, I would just encourage people to talk more broadly about to people during pregnancy and in that first year after having a baby. What's going on? How are you doing? I know this can be a very challenging time frame. And looking for not just depression, but a lot of irritability, a lot of rage. Right. I
Mhm.
mean, when you are sleep deprived for
Yep.
weeks and months on end, you are really, really highly irritable. But if you're beyond that, like I used to say, I felt like I had this veneer over me, like I kind of looked like I was okay, but just like one nick, one scratch, and I was like, "Boom!" Like I
Yeah.
couldn't. I was just so like, yeah, so highly irritable and a lot of rage in this time frame. I was so angry at my husband. He got to leave every day and go out into the world, right?
Yeah.
And I had to stay at home and take care of these two little people who like there was nothing. I was getting no benefit. So just yeah. And then the other thing is like know that there are resources available, I know it's scary to ask about something if you don't know where to send somebody for help, but there's this
Yes.
National Maternal Mental Health Hotline that anybody can call. Parents can call, providers can call. There are these resources, and also Postpartum Support International. So I think if providers know that they have somewhere to either get help or that the parents can get help, that you're more comfortable asking about it.
I think that's encouraging because while it is a, kind of cardinal sin per se, but, there's something you can do about it. It's an
Right.
easy fix to
Yeah.
right the ship there. Yeah, and again, so many ways this can present, and intrusive thoughts that are disturbing. Just there's so many things that again we need to make sure we're asking about in a non-judgmental way that's going to allow very guilt-ridden, quite
Yeah.
often, moms to say, yeah, like this is happening, and we with all the pictures postpartum, and again, my beef always was this, we've done such a great job of advocating for breastfeeding, and it's the best thing in the world, and it's the best thing for the baby, and some moms just can't do it, and it's not good for the family, it's not good for the relationship, it's not good for any of those things.
Oh,
But
we
we
could talk
really
for hours on
yeah,
that.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
like
yeah.
one of my, that
Yeah.
connection between breastfeeding and mental health. Woo,
So,
yeah.
but I think what it makes me think of is just really think about how you're asking your questions. Really, be intentional about this is somebody who probably has a tremendous amount of guilt that it's not going, commercial storybook, version of postpartum, and how do we help normalize that it's okay to not be okay, and it doesn't, and you're experiencing, massive identity shifts. I mean, your story is actually kind of heartbreaking to me that
Yeah.
you had to kind of choose between, like, do I give up, and that talk about that identity loss, like this whole thing I worked my whole life to do in intelligence, and it's really frightening to have to think about giving that up. Um, anyway, so
Yeah. Just one last thing I want to emphasize is that, any mom who's experiencing postpartum depression or related illnesses believes that she is the worst mother in the world and she is the
yes.
only one who has ever felt this badly. Right.
Yeah.
And so to be able to say, you're not alone. Lots of moms go through this. I went through this. I can help. Just like you can just almost like feel the tension just sort of dissipate because she's been holding it all in and like trying to do it all herself, and just to know she's not alone. This is not your fault, and we're going to help you get help.
To that point, I want to thank both of you for being so open and genuine and honest. You're both intelligent, successful, compassionate women. Jenna, I know you very well. Adrienne, I may have just met you, but I certainly get the sense you've been successful at work, at home, and everywhere in between. And so your willingness to share your stories and to share about how it wasn't quite so easy all of the time, I think is going to have a huge impact in of itself. So I appreciate so much that you're both willing to do that here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk with your audience and to share my experience. And hopefully somebody will learn from it and that somebody will get the help that they need.
Absolutely. Well, this has been one of my favorite episodes, so I'm very excited that we finally were able to get you on and have this discussion. And I feel like we could have like 9 follow-up discussions. But
Including that I want to know if your uniform fit or for how long your uniform fit
yes,
while
and
you were pregnant.
pregnant with twins,
Yeah.
not long.
Okay,
Yeah,
that answer's
I grew out of that
provided.
puppy. That was another issue, but and again, that's another issue. But anyway, we've got to wrap. Corinne, we've got to wrap this up. We were
Sorry, I
so
was
close.
curious. I apologize. Go ahead, wrap us up.
Yeah, I've got pictures to prove it. So, to our listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope that this gave you some insights into some great questions to ask if you're working with somebody who is pregnant or postpartum. Just don't. I think I maybe figured out the title for the episode. Don't tap around maternal mental health. Okay,
Love it.
I love it.
Not tap dancing around maternal mental health. So,
Ba-dum-bump.
yeah, okay, now they're both you can't see us, but Corinne is tap dancing with her hands right now.
Right, and I am taking my daughters next week to see the Rockettes.
Oh,
so
nice.
yes, to celebrate
right.
Christmas. Yeah.
This is a great episode. Does it have to end?
It doesn't. It does, Corinne. But what we will say until next time,
stay curious
and mind your EBPs.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Remember, we love hearing from our listeners, so leave us a message on SpeakPipe or send us an email. Both can be found in our show notes. Our theme music is Failed Attempts by Nitro, and our administrative assistant is Bree Mercer.
Thanks for listening to Practical for Your Practice.
If you like what you're hearing, please feel free to follow us, rate this episode, and share it with others.
Until next time.